As the slide shows, my name's Chris Walsh. My role is as a performance and intelligence lead for communities. The purpose of this role is to use intelligence from a range of partners such as the police, council and housing providers to develop an understanding of community safety problems so that interventions can be developed to address issues. This presentation is going to provide an overview of datasets available for analysis and the proposed strategy to undertake analysis to identify underlying factors associated with crime and antisocial behaviour. The format of the presentation, the areas that I'm going to cover: first of all, I'm going to look at the current approach to intelligence analysis that's used. Then I will provide an overview of the datasets and the proposed work to explore the data. I'll then go into the proposed statistical techniques to look at relationships between variables, to highlight some of the research questions that I want to answer. And finally, what I'll do is I'll provide some conclusions and next steps for the research. So I'll go into now the current approach then that's used to display intelligence. So at the moment we use a range of textual descriptions and visual displays of intelligence, and as you can see here, the main types here are to look at types of incident and breakdowns of that, to look at geographical hotspots, which you can see in the bar chart on the right hand side there, and also in the map towards the bottom, so using geographical information systems for that. You can see also that there's trend information there, seasonal trends that's used. What I would say is that the vast majority of the approaches are mainly descriptive in the nature, and so I think there's an opportunity to take more of a rigorous approach to look at relationships between variables, and so we can predict issues before they happen. What I'd like to do now is provide an overview of the datasets that I'm going to be using for this analysis. I think it's really important to get to know the data and undertake any potential cleaning before getting anywhere near to statistical analysis. So the first dataset that I'm looking at is a dataset of recorded crime, and you can see here from the left hand side there that the starts off with crime categories, so some categorical data in there. It then's got some time data there, date, time, that kind of stuff, so we can turn that into months, we can turn that into days, weeks, hour of the day, lots of stuff, work we can do with that. And then there's some geographical data there, street names, grid references for mapping, and also then some other geographical areas. So as I say, one of the purposes of this is about identifying where there's rogue values, where there's blank values, and also a strategy for dealing with those. I want to though look at that variable of crime in terms of other factors, in particular deprivation factors. So you can see here from this table there's a range of different areas that we've got, socioeconomic type factors that are seen to be related to crime in an area. So levels of income, levels of employment, rates, educational attainment, and then towards the right there you've got numbers of young people aged between 15 and 24. That's both young people generally, and the one on the right hand side is for young males. So this is this table here is broken down by super outputs area on the left hand side, and that's the smallest geographical area you can get data for, so it's quite rich in terms of that. It's also, this stage is about building a feel for the data in terms of potential relationships and possible hypotheses for later analysis. So the purpose of data exploration then is to determine the underlying properties of the dataset and to look at what statistical tests might be appropriate. So you can see here there's a range of graphical techniques, and there's also a range of statistical techniques that I'll be undertaking to achieve this, and that will be around at the top left there, looking at the shape of the data, the extent to which it's normal, or whether there's a positive or there's a negative skew to it, the extent to which, using things like box plots, there are outliers in the individual data points, and then also in the top right you can see there the scatter plot there, looking at variables, looking at the R squared value for that to look at the extent to which they follow a linear relationship. And then there's also a number of other tests to look at things like central tendency of the data, the extent, looking at the center of the data, using things like the mean, although that can be influenced by outliers, the mode, as in the most common value, and also the middle of the data, using the median. So a range of different things on central tendency. Also looking at measures of dispersion, so looking at the spread of the data, looking at things like the range, looking at the standard deviation there, looking at the variance in the data. So a range of different tools and techniques to get under the skin of that. So in terms of proposed statistical techniques that I intend to use, I've identified 4 particular areas. The first one is around measures of association. So that's around generally looking at the relationship between variables. So this is around areas such as correlation, using techniques such as Pearson's and Spearman's rho to look at the association between variables and the strength of that. The next area is around regression analysis, so to understand the extent of the relationships between independent variables, such as the number of 15 to 24-year-olds males in the area, and the dependent variable of levels of crime in the neighbourhood, so using techniques such as ANOVA to look at that. The next area that I would want to look at, the second one, is hypothesis testing. So looking at testing the null hypothesis that, for example, burglary is not related to levels of deprivation, or if the test statistic threshold is met, then that might be rejected in favour of the alternate hypothesis that burglary levels are related to levels of deprivation. The next area would be time series analysis. So this is around exploring seasonal aspects, so using techniques such as ARIMA modelling to achieve some of that, moving averages, other areas like that, and also around making forecasts. And finally, in terms of the fourth main area, looking at undertaking multivariate analysis. So in addition to the bivariate analysis between 2 variables that I've talked about, I also want to look at relationships between more than one variable. So a couple of examples of that would be cluster analysis to group neighbourhood together on the context of broadly similar socioeconomic factors, and also using multiple regression to see the extent to which a variable such as crime can be explained or interpreted from a range of other factors, socioeconomic factors, so you can use that for some modelling. By way of concluding comments then and next steps, in terms of the goals of the analysis, this is to use a more rigorous statistical analysis to develop interventions, to inform interventions with the goal of making communities safer. How we do this? I think before you saw that the approach was around descriptive analysis and summarising multi-agency data. I want to move towards looking for more causal relationships and predicting emerging issues so we can get in there to prevent rather than respond to issues. And then in terms of next steps, the next steps for me are to undertake the analysis, to identify those key issues, to deploy resources to address those issues, and then to measure the impact to look for where there has been a statistically significant difference because of the interventions that's been put together. Thank you for listening.